goodness.
You guys
Hello. We're live.
We're live.
Hello.
Get ready.
It's kiss and tell time.
Who you kissing? Who you telling?
Telling everybody and
Let's
kissing
talk about it.
whoever.
I want everybody to meet one of our new co-hosts, Dr. Sabrina.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Super excited to get this conversation going. And for anybody that is watching and that's going to join, then please feel free, put your comments, announce that you're here, put your questions in at any time, please. And I'm fair game. So I'm saying that already, that if you do have questions, there's pretty much not anything that I won't answer. Try to embarrass me. Let's make it a game.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, I think that's a better worded version of what I said in the last podcast. It's like, I'm going to ask a lot of questions. I'm not going to have any answers, but again, try and embarrass me.
Yeah, totally.
So let's everybody do a quick introduction and for the audience and offshore. Dr. Jennifer McBlaine. I'm the CEO and founder of KissandTellMyHistory.com. And I'm a clinical sexologist. And I'm here because I want sex to be an easier conversation for everybody.
Dr. Sabrina, you go next.
All righty. I'm Sabrina Rojek, and I'm also a sex therapist, marriage and family therapist, and transcendental coach. I help the whole person. So I also have a holistic practice outside of sex therapy. And to me, this is just that other extension of how do we help to support people to show up fully? The fact that we still have shame on anything, not just sexuality, but shame to be ourselves, to speak our own truth, to show up. Then I'm a truth seeker, and a ball buster. Like, it's time for us to get out there and be ourselves. And so, that, like, to join in these conversations, and that's why I became, a sex therapist, was to understand to be very honest, my own trauma and crazy as far as my family was concerned with sex, and was sex addict to sex therapist. This was my healing path. Whatever I can give to you all to help you, that's truly is like, if you want to talk about the darkness and the greasy, I lived that world for sure. So it's healing that and being able to release our shame. I want to help other people do the same. This is silly that this is still such a thing,
Well, I'm super excited to meet you, Dr. Sabrina, and I relate to a lot of what you said. I'm Steph. That's it. I have no formal education in any sort of sex or therapy sex therapy. Let's not say no formal education in sex, because no formal education in sex therapy or anything along those lines. I do call myself a lifelong learner of, sex and, all of the things that surround it. But that's why I love, getting to chat with ladies like you.
Yes, absolutely. I'm on live.
Me too.
Yep, right. You heard that yell, right? That's what happened. So what do we have? Do we have a first question yet? Or Steph, you've got something?
We don't have any questions yet.
Dr. Jenny?
Dr. Jenny.
Yeah, right now we don't have anything posted, but I can say one question that people typically ask me when they find out what I do for a living is how often should I be having sex?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the topic.
Yeah, interesting.
Who goes first? We playing a round robin?
Well, I'll say what I usually say is the answer, and then Sabrina, you add to it, or you change what I say, because there's always more than one way to see everything.
And that's why we talk about sex.
Yeah. So anyway, what I typically tell people is it's up to you to define that of how many times you should be or should not be. It's not based on my definition or anyone else's definition but yours. So if you think once a month makes you happy, then that's your number. But if it's 7 times a week, then that's your number too. And ideally, it's finding the partner that, that can meet that, is flexible.
Totally. Now, as far as like numbers are concerned and what is out there, and if we're looking at magazines or if we look at these other things, then, and I agree completely with what you're saying. It's up to you. If you want to scrump 3 times a day, well, then you go for it. And if that's what feels good to you, then fabulous. If it ends up being 3 times a year, not at all. There's people who are asexual. That's not their thing. There's not a right or a wrong or a shaming. But from a numbers perspective, then they say the experts, that's us and whoever else us is, once a week is like the baseline, and 40 to 50-year-olds tend to fall more around that baseline. 20 to 30-year-olds, they say, is like twice a week. However, for me and what I find like in my practice, Dr. Jen, you might have a different number, and then Steph, you're also going to know as far as, in regular conversations, we all will know that it's a whole lot less than that is what I'm finding for the couples that I have. And I would say, I don't have, some hard data, but I would say like once a month is more common what I hear with couples, not single people, with couples, or less. So, if that gives you any indication, because people are always like, am I doing it enough? What are other people doing? Is it enough? Is it little? Here's the thing. You could be having tons of sex, but it could be absolute crap. So do you want that to count? You know what I mean? I'm over crap sex. Anyway.
Yeah, they don't really say that question. How much crap sex?
Right. You can say 90 times in a month, but how much of it did you wish somebody would have left some money on the doggone counter for you on their way out? You know what I mean? Like that would have at least made it worth my time or my while. I'll just say that when I was single. I felt that way.
So I think, and this kind of harkens back to what some of the questions or comments have been on the website, as well as things that we've written, is I think a lot of people have this, social media just in general, this standard of, oh, well, everyone has X, so I should be having X. And in this case, sex. But it's like people are affectionate in person, but then it's like, but then they go home and don't talk for 2 weeks. But if you talk to them, they're like, yeah, we're so in love. And it's like, you can be so in love and not talk for 2 weeks. I'm not, as my husband and I say, so to each their own, we say sausage, calzone. So I just think it's whatever feels comfortable to you. And I think we all go through ruts. So that's actually a question that I'd like to ask both of you is, I know in my life, I've, had ruts, and relationships and, what you're doing in life just in general can be a hindrance to those things. So if you're in a rut, how do you like wiggle your way out of it?
I like this one.
Yeah.
Jenny, you got something good?
Yeah, well, I'll try. How do you wiggle your way out of it? You do it, one, by acknowledging it. If you can really articulate it and say, you know what, I'm in a rut. I'm realizing I'm not honoring that part of myself. Part that likes to be touched, the part that likes to have an orgasm. That intimacy connection with my partner. That's the first step, is saying it out loud to your partner and having that conversation. Because most people only have the conversation with themselves inside their head. They might tell a girlfriend, or a friend, but they're not telling the person that they're sharing the bedroom with.
Imagine that.
Yeah, so my first recommendation would be acknowledge it out loud to your partner. And then say, what can we do? So one thing that you can do after you have that acknowledgement is to do it in steps. It doesn't have to be immediately get naked and have intercourse. It can just be a session kissing. and that's all you do. You know.
What do you mean that's all you do?
Just lighting that little spark.
Right.
You can do whatever you want, but I'm just saying that way you take the pressure off of yourself.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because usually a rut is not a week. A rut is usually a longer period of time. So you're trying to get your way back into there and acknowledging that feeling again, acknowledging the desire again. And the easiest way to start that is kissing or just stroking each other's arm and back and, and taking it slowly. I know you have more to add besides that, Sabrina.
Of course I have more to add. Did you kidding me? I have so much, and I actually have some questions built in, or like more conversation topics that are probably going to take us down a rabbit hole. So the first, ruts. First, I want to say we're talking about partners, for a second. However, there's also ruts, then of course singles. So I want to rope these folks back in as well, right? That it's you might have your own personal rut, and that might be if you have certain numbers, if you have certain connection that you feel that you require with other people. And so there isn't someone to have a conversation with necessarily, a steady person. So then in which case, what do we do? So let's make sure we come back to this piece. But a couple things that you said there, Dr. Jenny, too, is one, intimacy, right? Intimacy versus intercourse, or even outer course. And there's so many adults that when I say outer course, they're like, like dogs, when they do the little head tilt thing of what? I don't understand. What are you talking about? Outer course, the petting, the kissing, the touching, no penetration. Friends, it's still considered sex if it's penetrating an ear, if it's, if it's going into an orifice, that's considered intercourse. So let's just get, some definitions going. But yes, I think first it's being able to acknowledge for yourself that I want something different than what's happening, right? And sometimes it's really hard to share that with somebody else. So whether you're in a partner, whether you're single, like that's scary stuff to say to someone, and sometimes to even acknowledge like, hey, I feel off my game, or I'm not feeling connected to you. And so now it can be, if there is a partner, a two-way street conversation. Don't let it be where you're sitting there by yourself trying to figure it out. And like what you said, Dr. Jenny, keeping the conversation in your head. That's, your mind is the scariest place for most people. Most people
don't want to interrupt you.
Yeah, oh, please.
But along that line, and just to, broaden it, I guess, a little bit, is sometimes it's, you don't feel like sexy.
Totally.
And I think that kind of is like the third prong of the trident there. Is sometimes it's just, I don't feel sexy. And if you don't communicate that along with what you were saying, and that's why I wanted to interject that there, because I want you to address that as well in your
yes, and the not feeling sexy. And so then, and we talked about this on the podcast the other day too, Dr. Jenny, is just what are some of those things that you do for yourself to even gas yourself up to have the conversation, if that's what you need to do. And sometimes it does need to start with self. Do you need to look in the mirror? Do you need to just spend time with you? Do you need to know your body? Do you know your body? Do you know what's going on? And if there's a reason for the rut, usually, and so the piece for that is have some grace for yourself and for your partner, and to easily and gently have this conversation. Most people, this is an easy conversation, even if it's just to say, hey, we're not having sex. How do you feel about that?
Right.
Like, because that's the question you can ask.
It seems a little combative if you come at it in that way, instead of being like, hey, so why aren't we doing this? Or, hey, I need more than this. Or, hey, I'm not feeling sexy. And if your partner like is really invested, they'll be like, all right, so I will do what I can to make you feel sexy, because usually it's, I don't see you that way,
right?
You're seeing yourself that way. I will do what I can, and you have to do what you can on your end too. Absolutely. So I do this thing, it's called a LeFou shower, because I always talk to myself, I mean, all day, but specifically in the shower. So I don't know if you've ever seen, I'm sure you have, Beauty and the Beast.
Yes.
And Gaston's little buddy is LeFou.
Yes.
And all he does the whole time is like, no one spits like Gaston. Like,
He's just failure. He's just freaking
So what I do sometimes is I'll take a shower and have a LeFou shower, and especially if I'm feeling down on myself, and be like, I have to kind of just, it doesn't have to be in song. I try to make it, but I'm not very, like, that doesn't really.
I want to hear the song.
I mean, but it changes. But the thing is, I won't stop until I have something nice to say. So sometimes I'll be like, no one eats as much as you do. And then it's like, all right, no, let's start it over. LeFou wouldn't say
be nice to herself.
Yeah, and I think having that counterbalance of being like, I don't feel sexy, and it's, your fault because you're not making me feel sexy. I think it needs to be, I'm not making myself feel sexy, and and of course everything's on a spectrum, so whatever, but
how often the partner's also not feeling sexy.
Yeah, and that's usually
often they're mirroring each other, but they're not talking to each other about it. And then one says, I haven't been feeling sexy. And the other one's like, oh my God, I haven't been feeling sexy, or I've been gaining weight. I gained weight. And so I think you're staring right at that thing. And you're like, what are you talking about?
Especially if you're a couple and like in a rut, we'll say, like, and just having maybe a dry spell. Then if you say like, I don't feel sexy, and then like you said, most of the time they're like, me neither.
Yep.
And it's like, oh, well, what do you mean? And then you guys can both kind of work within those confines of like, A, building each other up, and B, Dr. Jenny, kind of back to what you were saying, building that intimacy factor, because a lot of people like, life is crazy. So it's like, you don't hold hands, you don't kiss, like you said, you don't like cuddle, you don't, there's kids in the bed, there's, all sorts of things. So it's interesting. And I think your insight there was about just kiss each other.
Right.
Like, and
just put your mouth on each other. Get some breathing going.
It's always easy, when you hear, us talking and giving suggestions, we make it sound simple.
Right.
And usually in the moment you feel awkward.
Or I think terrified.
Yeah. You do.
Terrified.
And then who teaches us that? Who teaches us how to talk about sex? I mean, we know because of education, but truly, who sits you down and says, this is how you talk about sex with your partner? No one does. So.
Totally. Well, and then not just partners. Then I've got another kind of question to pose into there that I did get earlier from someone. And it was single people and with dating. And in particular, the folks that feel like they will have a harder time dating. That gets determined by a couple of different things. That could be our other abled friends. That could be, there could be there could be all kinds of different reasons as to why it is that people don't feel mainstream, or they don't feel normal, or they don't feel like they look like everyone else, and that there's different other challenges then that come. So what for these folks, let's say, then let's talk about this, that there's a single people and they want love. They want to be able to have this conversation. They want to have a dry spell, but they can't even get there. And so they're watching us talking about, well, that's cute. What about me? And that's, we don't speak to them a lot. And so again, this could be other abled, this could be all kinds of different things. What are your thoughts about that? How do we make this an inclusive conversation?
For people who are dating, you mean?
That are single and that might not feel like they get to participate in the dating game in the same way that the majority seems to allow themselves. So there again, I'm saying like our other able friends with disabilities, that might be quads, that might be all kinds of different things. That could really even include, minority groups, LGBTQIA, like, folks that don't get lumped into the main regular hetero vanilla conversation.
Right. You know what? I'm a little bit dumbfounded here because I do know that there's groups out there to support, obviously LGBTQIA, if more to it. But I mean, I know there's groups for each thing, each uniqueness,
Mm-hmm.
if you will. So at least I can be talking to like-minded people.
Mm-hmm.
However, I'm dumbfounded.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and then maybe Steph, you might have some thoughts, but like, so here's an example of the thing. And so here's what I've been in. So when I was in one of my school programs, they fabulously had this panel of different groups. So again, we might have some that might have physical other abilities, whether again that's quadriplegic or not. That we had different panels of like an older group panel. Then we also had different kink and different lifestyles, and but one of the things that was most striking to me, honestly, was one of the friends that we had on there, and he had braces on his arms, and he could get around, but he also had a wheelchair. And so when we start to, first of all, we've got a society that doesn't look at certain people as sexual. That's what we do, and so we don't even, we don't bring any conversation to them or any light to them. And it broke my heart to hear him talk, because he was trying to get in the game, if you will, right? Like, this is one of our human desires. This is one of the ways that we can connect with others. It feels good. It's exercise. It does all of these great things. And he was trying to go about it healthfully for himself. And then he found that the only way that he was able to participate in the sex game was to then pay for it, which that's also fine too. Or you get a surrogate, or however that works for you. Like, no judgment here. But then for him and with society, that brought a certain amount of more damnation and judgment and more shame on top of him already feeling other. And so I was like, how do we include this conversation with folks that don't feel like they're already not a part of this for any reason whatsoever? And our society says you shouldn't be talking about sex. You shouldn't even be interested in it. We're really kind of, unfortunate that way. Is there, and maybe I can formulate a better question. I don't know if I haven't even really said one in there. Is there something that we can say that would speak to that? Or even have you come across that? And maybe it's just acknowledging it as a thing, and we'll figure out something else to do with it more. I don't know. I'm just bringing it up as one of the topics that I know doesn't get touched.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, and I'm glad that you expanded for me. It's hard too, because they feel isolated, and then society and their do's and don'ts, whatever that is, isolates them more. So how do you say, hey, what you feel matters?
Totally.
What society thinks is not, that's what you think that matters.
Yeah.
But, helping them find support. And that is what you're asking. Where do we lead them so that that their sexual needs, their human connection needs, are answered.
And intimacy, right? Like, we all, and that's what even started some of this conversation is it was a sex rut, and we could say it's an intercourse rut, but more than that, for most people's, you have the dry spell with the sex, and so there's the sex itself, the exercise act that gives us all these benefits, but then there's the intimacy, the connection, the love, all the good feeling drugs that we get that trickle into our bodies, that, as you just said beautifully, and I think really the way to address it is just addressing it, us being able to bring it up and say, hey, we see you, and doesn't mean we know all of the answers either. However, also inviting everyone to the conversation.
That's why we kiss and tell.
Yeah.
I think too, kind of going back to what both of you were saying, because Dr. Jenny, I mean, both of you, your advice and your thoughts on that topic and of that, whatever group you want to call it, can actually be expanded just generally. But I have, had conversations with people who have even something like a mastectomy or, are trans or things like that. And it's just like, oh, well, I'm just fetishized now.
Right.
Or people who are like obese, like,
yes, or pregnant even. I mean, fetishize everything, right? Yeah.
But I think, and again, going back to what you were saying, Dr. Sabrina, is when people, like that example where he, again, is, like, all right, I'm just going to pay for it then. Then that almost, not even, like, if nobody else knows, even if he feels no shame about it or whatever, that kind of just spirals down, right? Because if you feel like already like, oh, I'm having a hard time, and then you feel like, oh, I can only do it now if I pay for it, and then that just creates this like loop of, well, this is my self-worth, and I have to pay for someone to, even if it's just be my friend. And I think there are a lot of people just across the board. I know, just going on like friends of mine, like on their, dating apps, I'm going and I'm like, why does everyone look exactly the same? Like, and why does everyone look like they're 20 or 30 pounds like lighter than they are? Which I'm not like saying, oh, don't try and look your best or, fat shaming or anything like that. But it's like, I don't want a cookie cutter, like, I mean, sorry, Kardashians, but that face is just the same.
Yeah.
And every photo of people on these things is just the same.
Be you, right? People just be too afraid that like that they're not good enough and that they're not sexy enough.
That's
and
kind
like,
of
yeah,
that I'm trying to cast is
yeah.
like,
is it no matter what's going on for you, we can all not feel sexy, and we can all create a barrier for ourselves if we believe that there is one there.
But yeah,
I'm very well educated in that part of it.
Yeah. You don't want to limit yourself in any manner. I mean, any more than you have to.
Yeah.
And especially with society and their, definitions, you definitely want to break free from that. But we're almost out of time.
Already.
So I know.
They go too fast.
It does.
Are there any questions from the folks that are there? And of course, feel free to send them in at any time too.
Yes.
Whether if you don't catch us on here, and now that you see this is regular, then I just want to remember too to encourage everyone. PM, IM, snail mail, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, any one of us. We're in multiple places. Email them and send them in, and then we can also bring those things up here. Of what are the conversations that people aren't having, or what are the ones that everybody's having, and we want our 2 cents. So I just want to remind folks for that too, that we want this to be a conversation.
That's why I'm involved, because I'm just going to ask the questions.
We want to advertise too, because in 2 weeks on our next podcast, we have a special guest, Amina Peterson. Amina was in the show Sex, Love, and Goop, and she will be here in 2 weeks on the 22nd.
I'm dying.
She is our special guest.
And that's on the 22nd, right?
Yeah, February 22nd, 7 p.m.
I'm putting here a little comment on that.
I bawled my eyes out on like her presence on the Sex, Love, and Goop. And I don't want to ruin it for anyone who hasn't watched it, but it's all a great series, and it's all very interesting and like cool to listen to and to see what other people think and what other options and whatever. But she, I don't know, just spoke to me in a way that I was like, okay.
Yeah.
I'm not
crying.
And to be fair, I mean, I cry all the time. I've cried at like Dawn commercials, but
We did get Courtney did ask a question real quick. Is that all right if we grab it, Dr. Jenny, or we got to pop off?
No, we can answer the question.
Okay. So she said, I know what you're saying regarding those in the disability, other abled community. Thank you for bringing that up, Sabrina. How you are brought up affect how you can feel about sex and intimacy?
Yeah. So I think she's saying how you're raised. So how you're raised, how does that affect how you feel about sex? I'm pretty sure that's
Well, I know people who are like, if they come across someone who is, I mean, anything, like whether they are, you know, special needs or whatever it is, are like immediately like, I feel like I need to distance myself, or I feel like I don't know how to handle whatever that person is or is experiencing. So just kind of totally avoid it. So I think, Dr. Sabrina, that Courtney is, you know, smart to ask that question, because whether or not it's just talk about sex or talk about sex with, you know, an expanded view, is very, very different.
Yeah. And again, just to wrap that up, and Kim, thank you for pouncing in with your comment as well.
Yeah,
and working in healthcare and the differences of, you know, other ables and different patients and being in healthcare, that we don't give voice to that. And so again, we all are seeking intimacy. We're all seeking connection. And one of the wonderful, beautiful ways we get to do that is with an expressions of our sexuality and our sensuality, whether that's just with ourselves, if that's not at all, because that's not our thing, or if that's with others. And I think then just at the very least is we can't just be judging all people, you know, we're not the ones to get to decide whether or not someone else gets to own and accept and step into their own sexuality. And so just as a society, we need to, you know, check ourselves.
We get to decide whether or not our own sexuality or our own thoughts or our own kink or our own, you know,
yourself. We're not
okay. Nobody gets to decide what's good, or bad, or wrong, or right for anyone, including yourself, typically, because we cast those shadows upon ourselves as well, as much as we're taught, kind of going back to what Courtney said, as much as it's, oh, well, I learned this, or we don't get to go about those things without questioning them.
And remember, everything you learn at home growing up can be unlearned.
Yes.
Now, once you leave home, you can write your own story.
Yep. Whatever kind of weird you're into, friends, there's a whole other world out there that's also into it. So that's the other thing I want to, you know, like kind of leave that with, and then Dr. Jenny, you know, finish the wrap up, is that everybody's doing stuff. Everybody's doing it. And so we tend to get isolated. We feel like we're alone. We feel like we're by ourselves with some of these questions, or we feel wronged or shamed. Whatever weird you're into, my friend, lots of people who are into it. And that's good, as long as you're not hurting yourself or others, you know? Love.
That's what I was doing to others.
Thank you, everybody who joined and said.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this platform for all of us and our friends that joined us. Bring your questions in.
Yes.
Friends. Follow, like, subscribe, make it happen.
Absolutely. Dr. Jenny, as always, it was a pleasure. And Dr. Sabrina, it was amazing to meet you. I've been a fan of you for a while, so I'm excited that I got the opportunity to give my little 2 cents in, my 2 pennies.
We'll see everybody in 2 weeks.
February 22nd at 7 p.m. with Amina Peterson. We will see you all there.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.